All right.
All right. Hello and welcome to the PFF Live Q&A. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Ari Meirov and Brad Spielberger. Ari, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well, and talk about a wild week. We got it all yesterday, from an early London game starting at 9:30 to a million missed field goals during the course of the day, a few more game-winning field goals after that. Then we got all these young stud quarterbacks going off, and then the Bills just hammering the Chiefs on Sunday night, and we also got a 1-hour rain delay. So literally got it all, and we have another game coming up tonight, but a lot to talk about before that.
Yeah, Brad, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I think the interesting storyline this week, which we'll get into a bit, is parity has been restored. A lot of those, middle of the pack teams either won or lost, and so I think there's a big cluster of, what is this team? So it's always fun to figure out who we have playing for us.
I don't think I've probably ever watched football for as long of a consecutive period of time as I did yesterday. As you said, Ari, between the 9:30 a.m. game and then that weather delay that I personally had no idea what to do with myself for an hour. I was like, I guess I'll just stare at the TV for the next hour. But let's get into something that happened last Thursday, actually. And that's the Russell Wilson injury. Wound up being a little bit more severe than some people thought. Since the game was on Thursday, some people thought that he might be able to come back within a week span and play on Sunday, but that certainly does not look to be the case at this point because there was a fracture involved. So for the foreseeable future, at least right now, it's going to be Gino Smith at quarterback for the Seahawks. And at this point, it is an interesting situation because the Seahawks not only have to plan for the next, game or two, whatever it is that Russell Wilson's out, but if you remember, there was the drama over the offseason where there was the trade rumors around Russell Wilson. And that's something that the Seahawks really need to now figure out before the offseason is to get Russell Wilson back because Seattle doesn't have a quarterback of the future. And if you're looking at the draft right now, this is not the best year to be needing a quarterback. Spencer Rattler actually got benched this week. Malik Willis certainly looks like an interesting prospect. But one thing that I've noticed with him, which is kind of strange, is that he actually picks up his back foot when he's throwing deeper throws. So there could be some mechanical issues that you kind of have to solve for a smaller school quarterback like that. But yeah, definitely something that not only in the interim here with Geno Smith starting, but Seahawks have to be thinking about their quarterback situation of the future as well right now.
Yeah, you're for sure right, Doug. And this is now the second time that Geno Smith is going to come in and replace a quarterback who was on a consecutive game streak. In 2017, of course, he did the same thing to Eli Manning, who I believe was on a 210 game streak, and then he was benched for just a game. Russell Wilson was on a 149 game streak, and now Geno's coming in for him due to injury. This whole thing about his future with the Seahawks, I don't think it's surprising. If you follow the story this offseason, the Wilson saga was serious. I mean, he went public with it. He told Dan Patrick he's tired of being hit so much. His agent came out and gave out 4 teams he would accept a trade to. The Bears tried to trade for him but failed, and eventually the Seahawks allowed Wilson to be involved in the offensive coordinator hiring of Shane Waldron. They added some pieces, brought back some guys like Chris Carson, added Gerald Everett. But the narrative that the problem is fixed was crazy. The drama was, I think, just put on hold for now. Pete Carroll is 70 years old. I don't think he had an interest in bringing in a young quarterback and trading Wilson, who financially it wouldn't have made much sense during that early portion of the offseason. But this is a team that has not made the conference championship game since 2014. They can get over the hump. They're in the toughest division in football. And looking back at the history from the contract negotiations and other stuff between these two sides, the friction, it's there. It's real. And the Seahawks, what makes it really interesting, they could have restructured Wilson's contract this offseason to free up some cap room. They don't need his permission. They could have just done it, and they didn't. I think that tells you a lot about where things stand.
It says a ton because Seattle needed to create room, as many teams did this offseason, and they essentially explored every single avenue to avoid restructuring Russell Wilson's deal, which would suggest that they are trying to keep that door open. And you mentioned he played 149 games in a row. He'd taken the most sacks, over 400 sacks since then. And I think this is a team where I've been kind of predicting their demise for a couple of years. Is the only fall. And they're frankly not a good football team without him. So Geno Smith could be, rewarding his former team, the New York Jets, with a wonderful draft
We've got
Did you lose me
Brad
for a
breaking.
second there?
Yeah, we've got Brad breaking up a little bit here. Gino Smith certainly played well on Thursday, but I'm not sure if they've got the highest hopes for him moving forward there. And I think that overall for the Seahawks, we'll get off the subject in a second, but there were higher hopes for this Shane Waldron-led offense heading into the season, and that hasn't quite come into fruition. I think Russell Wilson has played well, but the Seahawks have underperformed a little bit at this point. They're 2-3 right now. Let's get really quickly into the Giants injury situation, because those injuries are really mounting up in New York. Daniel Jones left the game with a concussion. Saquon Barkley, ankle injury that really blew up right away and swelled up on the sideline. Kenny Golladay tried to play through a hyperextended knee. Then he eventually left the game. And then that's adding to the injuries that they already faced heading into the game, with Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton both out with hamstring injuries. That really allowed Kadarius Toney to step up in week 5, have a massive game. He actually got ejected from the game, so they were even left without one more wide receiver in that game. But hope should be high for Kadarius Toney after that game. But overall, definitely in a bit of a mess there injury-wise for New York. We'll see if Daniel Jones can come back from that concussion in time. But I wouldn't say that hopes are probably quite as high for someone like Saquon Barkley, at least heading into week 6. We'll just have to wait and see on Kenny Golladay with how that knee responds this week.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing to take away is that none of these injuries sound like a long-term thing. It's not a high ankle sprain for Saquon. It's a low ankle sprain. Daniel Jones, concussion protocol. We'll see if he'll be able to clear it. Obviously, the video that we saw on the field was a bit scary with how he was a bit wobbly there on the field. And then the wide receivers. I mean, Shepard and Slayton have been out now for 2 weeks. They're both recovering from hamstring injuries. Obviously, those are very tricky. And Golladay has had knee injuries in the past. He said he hyperextended it, tried to play through it, just couldn't. So it's going to take. We'll see what happens during the course of the week. But you look at this Giants team; they have a pretty rough schedule here ahead. Rams are coming in this week. They have a couple of other games with the Carolina, Tampa Bay, Kansas City. The Raiders are all on the schedule coming up here. So a very rough stretch coming up here for the Giants, and these injuries for sure do not help.
I think the Kadarius Toney breakout game is a huge storyline for New York, also because of the fact that they traded down in the draft and took him. I think if they do that and then we have all these issues all offseason and then he doesn't produce at all, I think it looks a lot worse. Now, look, Justin Fields played pretty well and won another game, and we'll have questions about Daniel Jones, although I agree with you, Doug. Like you say, it's weird how he's the least critiqued quarterback in New York maybe ever, but that question will always float. But to now look at Dave Gettleman, the GM, and say, look, the Giants, they're going to be bad this year. They're 1-4. Like you said, they have Rams, Panthers, Chiefs coming up. That might be one of the worst teams in football, but you have an extra first-round pick. Let's say you do like Daniel Jones. You want to stick with him. You have 2 first-round picks to use on other positions. You spent a lot of money this offseason. You have some holes, yes, offensive line, of course, pass rusher out on the edge, but all these resources available, you might be able to plug some of those holes. So at least there's that silver lining going forward. I'm sure that's not much solace in New York, though.
Yeah, right before we get into some other topics, just want to mention the Juju Smith-Schuster injury, reportedly out for the season with a shoulder injury. And that's a Steelers team that's dealt with a lot of injuries at the wide receiver position already. Deontay Johnson missed a game. Chase Claypool missed a game. James Washington missed a game. So I'm not sure exactly who they will have left moving forward there. But if James Washington can get back on the field, he would probably emerge as a starter at this point. Beyond those guys, there's Ray McLeod, Cody White. They've got 3 solid starters, but taking Juju out of the mix certainly makes them a little bit weaker at that position. Anything you guys want to touch on the Steelers wide receiver situation before we move on?
I guess I'll just add that James Washington was a player who requested a trade this offseason because of all those receivers who were there. And now this is a pretty big opportunity for him to step up with Juju out for the year. He, as well as Juju, are both in the final year of their contract, so both will be free agents. Obviously, Juju, this one hurts. For Washington, a pretty big opportunity here.
Yeah, I'll just throw in really quick. Juju obviously has fallen off from a trajectory where people thought he could be one of the best receivers in football, but second most third down receptions since last year. He is Big Ben's safety net on those third down plays when he needs a catch. And so losing that element, maybe Najee Harris will have 25 targets in a game at some point, but it is a big loss because he keeps the chains moving. And then your Deontay Johnson, your Chase Claypool are kind of more of your big play threats, but you need that underneath presence as well.
Let's get into some of the 3-1 teams that lost on Sunday. There was the Raiders, the Panthers, the Broncos, and the Cincinnati Bengals. Basically, just who we think is the most concerning out of that group. And I would say the Raiders out of that group of 4 teams. They lost a really strange game to the Bears, where if you had looked at, if you had told me entering that game that the Bears were going to run like almost 40 times and that Justin Fields wouldn't be able to do much on the ground, not a great passing day from Justin Fields, going up against a Raiders team that looked pretty good in this week, I'd say, all right, well, there's probably a pretty good chance that the Raiders would win that game. But Raiders players were put in a really tough position, even heading into the week, with the email from John Gruden that leaked from 2011 with a racist trope about D. Smith, the NFLPA head. So we're not quite sure what's going to happen with that situation with John Gruden, but for the players to find that out on Friday night, have John Gruden talk to the team before the game, but then have to play again on Sunday, just a really difficult situation. But I haven't totally been buying the Raiders, I'd say, overall this season, because there are some serious flaws with that team, one of which just being their offensive line. In this game, we saw Alex Leatherwood, their first-round pick, move from right tackle to right guard. And quite frankly, it didn't go any better for him at right guard than it had been at right tackle. And that's something that you just don't really want to see early in a first-round pick's career, having to move him from tackle to guard to try to fix things on the fly, and then for that not to happen. But really, overall, the Bears beat the Raiders in the trenches. They beat them with Khalil Herbert and Damian Williams, these kind of no-name running backs, and the Raiders couldn't do much to stop them. Raiders also beat themselves quite a bit in this game with some key penalties, couldn't stop the Bears on the run. So yeah, I things started very promisingly for the Raiders this season, but you could sort of see in that game where they could go downhill pretty quickly here moving forward. Brad, what's the 3-1 team that lost on Sunday that you're the most concerned about moving forward here?
Yeah, I think it's another team where how they lost is a bit concerning in particular. And I think it's the Denver Broncos. They obviously had a bunch of injuries coming into this game, missing, a bunch of their receiving core. Obviously, Jerry Jeudy lost for a while. KJ Hamler out for the year. But Cortland Sutton was questionable coming in the game, did playing and actually played well, produced well. Tim Patrick, a reliable depth piece there, looked okay. But their secondary, honestly, against Big Ben, who we, as a website, I think probably make fun of maybe too much. But, I mean, this secondary, in particular, Kyle Fuller, their big addition this offseason after the Bears cut him, got beat deep right out of the gate. I think it was the first snap of the game with Deontay Johnson beating him deep, and it happened a couple other times as well. Chase Claypool got behind the defense. It was just an uncharacteristic and undisciplined defensive outing from Denver. And I think it was also just a missed opportunity. We talk about all these teams that are 3-1 and off these good starts, and now Denver in this AFC West is just another kind of cog in the machine.
Yeah, Denver and Las Vegas, both teams that started undefeated at 3-0 and have now lost back-to-back games. Let's talk about another team like that, the Carolina Panthers. I mean, as I said, started 3-0 and have now lost back-to-back games to NFC East team, and it's troubling if you're the Panthers that you couldn't hold the lead against an Eagles team that has been just so conservative and so just not interesting on offense since week 1. And it's also concerning that Sam Darnold is once again turning the ball over as much as he has. He had 3 interceptions yesterday, and that gave some of us some flashbacks from those Jets days. One of the biggest things that made the Panthers so great the first 3 weeks was his ability to avoid those turnovers, avoid the interceptions, avoid the fumbles. Yesterday's loss was inexcusable, and there isn't much room for error in this NFC South division, but we got to remember, they don't have Christian McCaffrey. Matt Rule said today that he's hopeful he'll be back this week against Minnesota. And this is a team that's also been aggressive on the trade market, adding Stephon Gilmore, adding C.J. Henderson. So they're all in on this season. They have the Vikings, Giants, Falcons, and Patriots next. Those are winnable games. So I'm not panicking yet, but there are some issues that need to be fixed. And what becomes more interesting here is that if Sam Darnold doesn't turn this around, he's fully guaranteed $18.8 million next season on that 5th-year option. We've seen how aggressive Carolina has been at the quarterback position ever since Dave Tepper got there. With the Bridgewater contract, trading for Darnold, he's been going downhill these past few weeks. Obviously, I don't want to panic, but these last couple of weeks have been giving us some flashbacks of those days with the Jets.
think the Panthers were kind of considering all options at that quarterback position this offseason as well. Let's talk about some players of the week. And I'll start off with a player who's really been impressive this whole season already, and that's Rondale Moore, the Arizona Cardinals wide receiver. Another massive game from Moore on Sunday. Made one of the best catches of the week, a toe tapper down the sideline where, as I was watching that one live, I think it was initially ruled that he went out of bounds. I was like, I'm pretty sure he caught that ball. I'm pretty sure he got both feet in there, and he absolutely did. But Rondale Moore is a really interesting player because he's simply just not playing that much right now. He's PFF's. He's got the 12th highest receiving grade among wide receivers, but he's only playing 45.3% of Cardinals receiving snaps. On those snaps, he's actually targeted on 27.3% of his routes. So the Cardinals definitely have to figure out a way to get Rondale Moore on the field more moving forward here. And it seems like there's some pretty easy routes to do that. You know that DeAndre Hopkins isn't going to be coming off the field, but I could certainly start to see Rondale Moore starting to steal some snaps, either from Christian Kirk or from AJ Green. I'd say that, those are both definitely solid starting caliber wide receivers, but they're just not adding the same element that Rondale Moore is. The other key thing here is that Max Williams, who's actually been a standout this season, finally having really a breakout year for the Cardinals, reportedly out for the season. So the Cardinals are a team that in the past has been willing to go into 10 personnel without a tight end on the field, go with a running back and 4 wide receivers. We might see even more of that moving forward, because if you take Max Williams out of the mix, there really isn't a tight end that you need to put on the field over a player like Rondale Moore here. So maybe you start to see some more 2 running back sets. Maybe you do start to see 10 personnel more, but one way or the other, Rondale Moore has to be getting on the field in a starting caliber role here moving forward. Ari, who was your top player or your biggest standout of the week, I guess I would say?
Yeah, and first of all, Rondale Moore. I remember a couple of weeks ago we did a bit of a fantasy segment here. If people listened, Rondale Moore was one of the guys we said to pick up, and he is obviously having a great rookie year so far. I'm going to go with a player who's in a contract year and from Dallas. And when we talk about the Cowboys, always talk about Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Zeke, Pollard, Gallup. The guy who doesn't get much national spotlight in that offense is tight end Dalton Schultz. He has 26 receptions for 280 yards and 3 touchdowns so far this season. He's top 4 among all tight ends in those categories this year. And in fact, he is PFF's highest graded tight end this season with a 90.4 overall grade. His 88.6 receiving grade is also first among all tight ends. And on top of all of that, he is PFF's #1 run blocking tight end as well. So he's really been doing it all. And Dak Prescott is looking for him dating back to last year. He has 895 receiving yards. He has 6 or more receptions in 3 straight regular season games, which ties Jason Witten for the Cowboys records for a Cowboys player since 2015. He was a 4th round pick in 2018. He's become a vital part of this Cowboys offense, and he's in a contract year, like I said, and he could be looking for a big payday this offseason at this rate.
It's a really interesting choice, especially because, Dallas recently paid Blake Jarwin at tight end. They obviously have a lot of big contracts all over the roster. So as much as they'd like to keep Dalton Schultz, they might not be able to. Even if he plays at this level, they might end up losing him. Like you said, they already have Michael Gallup to deal with. Connor Williams at left guard, also a free agent. I'm going to go with a free agent as well. It's a pending free agent, a guy who I think has raised his stock more than any player in the NFL this year, and that's Mike Williams, the Chargers wide receiver. I think the talent was always evident with him. Does things that a lot of players simply cannot do. Big body, can go downfield, get up and go over top of guys and make plays, up in the air in traffic that you just don't see a lot. It's why he was a top 10 pick out of Clemson. 2 more touchdowns against the Browns. Looked good. He had Denzel Ward on him a bunch and produced against him. I noticed they switched off of that. They had some John Johnson helping over the top at safety and doing all these different things, to try to corral Mike Williams. And right now, a healthy Mike Williams with Justin Herbert playing quarterback is borderline unstoppable at times. If he keeps playing like this, he might get a massive contract in free agency. The Chargers might have to be the ones to pay it up too.
Talked a little bit about last night's game between the Chiefs and the Bills, but might be experiencing a little bit of a power shift in the AFC here. The Chiefs, pretty surprisingly, 2-3 right now. And I'm not sure if this will hold for the rest of the season. I still have faith in the Chiefs, but it is kind of amazing the Super Bowl losing hangover always seems to be something that's pretty real in the NFL. The only recent team that's been able to avoid that was the Patriots, coming off the 2017 Super Bowl loss when they were able to beat the Rams, but the Rams weren't quite as good in 2019. 49ers weren't quite as good last season. And now the Chiefs have gotten out to some early struggles. But let's talk about who we think is actually the top team in the AFC right now. I'm going to go with, I know this... logic says it should be the Bills just because of what they did last night against the Chiefs and everything. And I think that they actually probably wind up finishing with the number 1 seed in the AFC when all is said and done. But just the team that I'm the most excited about is the Chargers. I just think that they're so fun. I think it's fun that Brandon Staley really embraces analytics, that he's just a very smart head coach. Justin Herbert seems like he's a player who's just going to get better throughout the rest of the season. I know that the defense wasn't quite as good in week 5 as they were in previous weeks going up against the Cleveland Browns, but they just seem like they're a well-balanced team, smart on offense, smart on defense. So even though I feel like logically I should say the Bills, I'm going to go with the Chargers as being the top team in the AFC right now. Ari, which way are you leaning there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a toss-up, and hopefully we might get to see these two teams face off this year. But, I would probably, just seeing, I guess it's just, seeing the Bills last night, seeing what they did to the Chiefs like that, I would probably lean slightly over to the Bills. And as you said, Doug, they'll probably at this rate get the number 1 seed just based off their remaining schedule, which I believe the winning percentage combined is like 397. So they have a pretty easy schedule moving forward on this year. But, I would lean towards the Bills, but again, like you said, I mean, what the Chargers have done this year, the energy that Brandon Staley has brought to this team, the fact that they've stayed healthy up until this point is a pretty big part in this. Of course, they've been hammered by injuries over the last few years. And then, some of the things, they've done on the offensive line from this offseason, adding all those players. I thought it was pretty funny that Rashawn Slater yesterday, Austin Eckler after the game said, "Stop chipping Myles Garrett. I'd rather take him one-on-one." It's like for a rookie to say that is quite amazing. I mean, coming into that game yesterday, he allowed 0 sacks on the year. So he's been a home run so far with that draft pick. Asante Samuel has been a home run pick in the 2nd round. So, the Chargers and the Bills, they've both been incredible so far this year. It's really hard just to pick one right now. I would probably just lean towards the Bills based off what we saw last night, what they did to Kansas City. But then again, Kansas City is 2-3 so far. The Chargers have a win over them as well. But it's a pretty tough choice. Let's just put it that way. We have some good teams here in the AFC.
Yeah, the interesting part about this question, I think, is that as you asked it, I realized, and frankly, this might be because the Chiefs are the Chiefs, but you look at the Browns, Chargers, Bills, and Ravens in the AFC, 4 of arguably the most analytically forward-thinking and kind of teams that are exploiting edges and finding edges in football, and the Chiefs so far have just been good enough to just be better than everybody else and have kind of won that way. But eventually when you're going to get 1-score games and the margins are going to become slimmer against these good AFC teams, those 4 clubs have an advantage in this area against the NFC Chiefs. But anyways, I'm going to go with the Bills. They were my preseason Super Bowl choice. Didn't get off to a good start with that loss against Pittsburgh in week 1, but I think they bounced back. And I think last night, although I still thought they could have done more, the biggest question mark for me has been this Bills front 7, particularly the defensive line. And I thought AJ Epinesa looked pretty good. And I thought obviously Gregory Rousseau had that awesome interception. The guy has 10-foot long arms and had that great pick on Patrick Mahomes. So those guys making plays, getting better as the season goes on. Then I think in the come playoff time, I think the Buffalo Bills can beat anybody.
Yeah, and that was done on defense without Matt Milano in the game. I wonder how differently that game would have gone without the hour-long break in the middle there, because a decent amount of the Chiefs fans actually left during halftime. I wonder if the Chiefs would have been able to mount a comeback. But I actually missed this topic going through our outline, a little peek behind the curtain. But let's just talk finally to finish this off about some of the wild finishes in week 5. And one of my favorite things that happened this week was late in the Chargers and Browns game when Austin Eckler, the Chargers running back, was playing really smart. He took a slide down near the goal line. He wanted to wait as long as possible to try to score. The Chargers were down 42-41 at that point. And then on the next play, once again, he was kind of lollygagging near the end zone, didn't want to score with too much time to leave for the Browns. And then the Browns defenders actually finally just pulled Austin Eckler into the end zone. Very smart play by the Browns as well, because they knew that they couldn't let them do that. They couldn't let them run down the clock to still give themselves a chance to win. The Chargers defense actually stepped up big a couple times there at the end of the game when it absolutely mattered. They forced a 3-and-out on the Browns' second to last drive, and then forced a turnover on downs there at the end of the game. But just a very interesting finish. And that finish in general had a ton of big plays. And then it was just, like I said, just kind of funny that the Browns were forced to drag Austin Eckler into the end zone there. Brad, what was your favorite finish, your favorite wild finish of Week 5?
Yeah, I mean, it was a truly infuriating finish, and it's something that's been happening for years on end. But I feel bad for Joe Burrow and this Cincinnati Bengals roster, because I think Zach Taylor essentially threw the game for them and multiple times, arguably. I don't understand, when you are moving the ball well, why you then decide as soon as you get into field goal range that you should just kind of pack up shop, not really try to advance the ball, not try to go for the throat, step on the throat, get a touchdown. 5 combined missed field goal kicks back and forth. I've never seen anything like it in my entire life. Mason Crosby, I think the first 2 were like 36 and 38 yards. Like, they weren't even long kicks. But yeah, for the Bengals to then go to Evan McPherson, rookie kicker, I think it was a 49-yarder where they were moving the ball just fine. The Packers are missing Jair Alexander, their number 1 corner. Jamar Chase has 6 catches for 160 yards and a touchdown. And instead, you just hand the ball to Samaje Perine to burn some clock or whatever you're trying to do. Leave the door open for Aaron Rodgers, and he does what he does best and comes back and wins that game. It just has to rip your heart out in Cincinnati, and it's all the coach's fault, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it was 4th and 1. There was 4 minutes and 19 seconds left. Jamar Chase at that point was really kind of ripping the Packers apart. So there were other options other than to let your rookie kicker try a 49-yard field goal. And the most tragic part of that is that Evan McPherson actually thought he made the field goal.
Oh my God.
He leaped into the holder's arms. I was like, dude, you did not make that field goal. That is, that was a tough one. Ari, what was your wildest finish of the weekend?
Yeah, if we're talking about all these missed field goals, a team that is waiting to see a missed field goal against them, it's the Lions. And unfortunately, they don't have that happening to them this year. I mean, that kick by Greg Joseph yesterday was big in a few ways, first of all, because first of all, the Vikings had a tough loss with Greg Joseph in week 2 to Arizona, a much shorter game-winning attempt, which he missed. And then secondly, that was probably saved Mike Zimmer from getting a lot of heat in Minnesota the way he has been getting over these past few weeks. If they would have lost that game, it would have been pretty bad. But, I tweeted yesterday, I feel bad for Lions fans. I do want to shift to the Lions just for a second, because, they're 0-5, but all their losses it's been hard fought and it's gut wrenching, but they fall back in week 1 against the 49ers. They had the lead at halftime in week 2 against the Packers. They fall back last week against the Bears. The final score in the game against the Ravens was 19-17. The final score in yesterday's game was 19-17. Both long field goals that they lose on. But this team is playing hard for Dan Campbell. If you're a player in that Lions locker room and you see your coach come out after the game, and this is the way he talks about you, then you're going to keep fighting for him. We're going to try a new feature here and play that video of Dan Campbell here. Let's see if this works.
When you see your players give all that they have and you lose that way, it's tough. You don't want that for them. So, but we'll be better for it, And there again, credit Minnesota, but we made the one mistake that cost us, and so ultimately, We didn't do enough to win, but I was proud of them, and I love the fight they have in them, and I love the grit.
Listen, I mean, that's a man who cares. That's a man who's invested. Let's just keep in mind, the Lions are in full rebuild. Campbell and their new GM, Brad Holmes, got 6-year deals, which is not something you see often. Their owner, Sheila Fordham, told them, we're going to be patient, let you guys build this from the bottom up. They have 2 first-round picks in each of the next 2 drafts. Brad Holmes and the rest of the front office are highly touted talent evaluators. I don't know if Jared Goff is the answer at quarterback, but I do know that they have some building blocks on this roster from the offensive line, a couple of weapons. So, I feel for the first time in a while, the Lions have the right structure here. It's been a while. I know it's been a lot of rough years there in Detroit, But if you want some Monday optimism here, I think that better days are ahead for this future of this franchise. I really do.
Yeah, I've got a good friend who's a Lions fan, and he seems he's downtrodden by all of the losses. He just doesn't want another 0 season, but it just feels like Dan Campbell is a more likable, head of the program or whatever that they've had in a few years there. Jim Caldwell was a good head coach, but very dry. Matt Patricia, I think that immediately everyone kind of saw that he was trying to do the Bill Belichick impression there and just wasn't quite as personable as Dan Campbell. And you never see that type of emotion out of a head coach that Dan Campbell showed on Sunday. So I do think that the fans are in a better place with the Lions, but you really can't help but feel bad for them, especially since they showed so much guts at the end of the game there by going for 2 to win the game. And then for the Vikings to just march down the field immediately and to break the poor Lions fans' hearts there at the end. It was tough to watch.
Oh, it was super unfortunate because by going for 2, you kind of incentivize the aggressiveness from Minnesota, and then they actually end up and going down. But I think real quick, I just think the interesting thing about Dan Campbell that I've realized that I think people ask this question a lot and they kind of wonder, let's say you're a bad team, you're 0-5, even before the season starts that you're not actually going to contend at all. How do you get guys to give the effort that Dan Campbell is currently giving so far? At press conferences like that where he's crying. And you know what? Does he care about wins and losses? Yes. But also you can tell he genuinely cares. Like, my players are trying to earn their next contracts in free agency. They're trying to, he cares on an individual level on every single player and how they can get better on the field for their own individual success. And that's what I think having a former player, focused coaching staff gets you that buy-in and that passion and intensity. So.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully better days are ahead for the Lions. It'd be nice to see them finally turn around here. But thank you for watching the PFF Q&A, live Q&A. I'm Doug Kyed. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed. Follow Ari on Twitter at MySportsUpdate. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Keep it on PFF.com for all of your news and analysis, props. You've got Monday Night Football coming up. So definitely head to PFF.com for all of that.